Okay, welcome to our second mini lecture as we investigate morphology. So you're here because you've just completed the mini lecture on parts of speech where we covered adjectives, nouns, adverbs, and verbs. So now we want to move into the next unit. And all of this, again, is building up to this larger picture we want to have about morphology. So now we're going to discuss morphemes. And that's a completely new term for you. I know that. It is mentioned in your readings, but perhaps it's still a little bit confusing. It's actually a super easy concept. So when we're talking about morphology, again, we want to remember that we're discussing how words are made and how words are formed. And you've already completed the parts of speech exercise using the words from our initial exercise about the taco, ordering tacos for lunch. Again, I feel like I'm going to constantly apologize for that story because it was kind of boring, right? But it's all I could think of. And so as you're looking at parts of speech and as you were trying to figure out what part of speech each word was, it might have been a little complicated, right? Because it really depends how we use the word in a sentence. And that's what parts of speech helps us identify. So we're going to go into syntax again at a different point, but I'm guessing you had some questions based off of what you saw. So for example, how can pre-order be a verb but yet end in er like nouns such as teacher or catcher or waiter, but yet it's still a verb in our sentence? How can screwed be an adjective when it ends in ed like a past tense verb would, right? I jumped over the fence, that ends in ed, but yet in our story, screwed was an adjective. Why is hoping a verb but hope is a noun? And why can agreement be a noun when agree is a verb? Okay, so I'm sure these are some questions you might have, or if you don't have yet, I'm going to tell you we're going to address those things because it's what makes syntax complicated for most of us, because we know how to use these words. We're speakers of the language, but we need to be able to understand how these words work at a grammatical, syntactical level and at a morphological level so that we can teach it. If you don't know it, it's going to be really hard to teach it. So that's why I'm teaching you how these work. And I will be answering questions like this over the rest of the morphology section. So we'll get to two of these questions in this mini lecture right here. So again, we're discussing how are words made, right? And when we went over that 2 lectures ago in class before spring break, we went over these word formation processes, and now we're turning our focus to derivations. And what is derivations? And we discussed how that's the biggest way that we create new words in English. And we went over these slides, and I'm going to show them to you again. With derivations, we form a new word from an existing word. And when we form this word, we can change that word's meaning, as in we're changing the definition of the word, and we're changing the word category. We're changing the part of speech, the lexical category. So we can change it from a noun to a verb, or an adjective to a verb, or an adverb. And we make those changes by either affixation or conversion, which is also known as zero affixation. So again, we're looking at this category called derivations when we take an existing word in our language and we create a new word from it. And there's 2 ways we do that. One way is affixation and one way is conversion. Let's discuss those 2 again. Even though we discussed it before spring break, I want to discuss it a little more. So derivations, conversion. Let's start with conversion, which is zero affixation. And you'll understand what zero affixation means by the end of this lecture. This is when we change the meaning of a word, but we don't change anything about the word in terms of spelling or pronunciation. We're just changing the meaning of the word. So we have the verb drive, as in to drive a vehicle. Right? Drive is a verb, it's an action. And we also have the verb drive, as in to drive a golf ball down the fairway. In both instances, the word drive is a verb. But what's different is the meaning. To drive a vehicle, drive in that sense has a different meaning and a different definition than drive in terms of what it means to drive a golf ball, right? So this is called zero affixation. This is called conversion. We took an existing English word and we now can use it as a verb in a different way to mean a different type of verb, okay? So we can change the meaning. We can also change the word category, change the part of speech, change the lexical category. Again, remember those three things are all saying the same thing. So we have the verb run. Every day I run. Run is a verb. But we can also use run as a noun. They went for a run. And if you recall from our parts of speech lecture, I said, how can we know if we're working with a noun or not? Well, a noun is often introduced by or close to an article. And articles were a, an, or the. They went for a run. I know I'm working with run as a noun based on the structure of that sentence. But here to show again, we took the word run in English and we have two different meanings for it. Run can be the action of running, or run can be the noun representing a thing that people do. People run. We can also have both types of changes. We can change the meaning and also change the word category. So look at drive again. Drive, the meaning changed, but it didn't change the word category. When we look at run, the word category changed, but the meaning didn't necessarily change that much, right? It's still, we know what run means. It's still this. It's not something else, okay? But sometimes we can do both. We can change the meaning and the word category, and I'm going to use the word, one of the words from our taco story, and we're going to use the word screwed. So we can use screwed as a verb, right? He screwed it in. He screwed in the light bulb, right? It's a verb there. It's an action. But it can also be used as an adjective. And an adjective, again, is describing something about a noun. In our story, it was used as an adjective. If Sam doesn't agree on getting tacos, my idea is screwed. So remember, an adjective describes something about a noun. And the noun there is idea. His idea to get tacos. And screwed is how he's describing it, meaning, and screwed doesn't mean the same action as like putting in a light bulb. It means basically my idea has failed, right? So here's a great example of how we have not really done anything else with the word except in terms of spelling it different or pronouncing it different, nothing like that. But we've changed not only the word category, it went from a verb to an adjective in this case, but we've also provided a different definition for it. So that's conversion. That's one way we do this derivational process. That's one way that we constantly are creating new words in English. Moving forward, I want you to set aside some of the rules that you think you know. So you look at the word screwed, right? And I propose the question to you, how can screwed be an adjective when it ends in ed, like a past tense verb, right? We add ed to a lot of words to make it past tense. Jump, jumped. Call, called. There's quite a few verbs out there. I'm running short on examples, but you know how it works. You add ed to make things past tense all the time. So moving forward, you have to set aside the rules that you think you know. You need to ask yourself, what does this word mean in context? So when we look at our taco story, if Sam doesn't agree on getting tacos, my idea is screwed. What does screwed mean inside that story, in the context of the story, in the sentence it's being used in? And where is the word in the sentence? In other words, what part of speech is the word? Forget some of the rules you think you know about English in terms of ed always meaning past tense, because just because a word ends in ed does not mean it's functioning as a verb in a past tense form. Okay, so put those rules aside. It's time to learn morphology as a linguist. The other way we create words through this derivational process is called affixation. So we can add a prefix or a suffix to a word, and those are terms we're going to get to later in this same mini lecture, okay? So don't worry about what those mean now. When we add this affixation, we can change the meaning So that semantic shift. If you look at the word believable, I can add un in front of it to unbelievable. And these are both still adjectives, right? But think about, what does believable mean and what is the definition of unbelievable? And those are two different meanings, right? I would hope you would agree. If not, go to a dictionary and check it out. When we add this affixation, so for example, we added un to unbelievable, sometimes it changes the word category. Sometimes it changes the part of speech. So we look at the word drive as a verb, right? Let's drive a vehicle. And we can affix the ER to it to make driver, which is a noun, right? So it's gone from a verb to a noun with this change, with this affixation. We also looked at this with the verb do while we were in class before spring break. I can add un to do to create the word undo, and it's still a verb, right? You can check a dictionary if you don't believe me. Now, I can also take the word do and add a bowl to it. So now I've got doable, and it's changed that verb to an adjective. Now, if I create the word undoable, it's still an adjective. These are all words that have different meanings and they apply different things. But from the root word do, I can create 3 different alternative meanings by affixing the word, by adding these little items to it. And we're going to learn about what those items are in this mini lecture. And we also kind of talked about this on our first day of class when we looked at the word like. Like is, we can use it as a verb. I like him. That's the #1 way we use it. But I also illustrated for you on the first day of class that I can use it as an adjective. I can use it as an adverb or preposition or a noun, depending on where it is in this sentence, right? So it's a different part of speech for all of these. And what's happening here is that derivation process we're just now discussing. We took a word, an existing word, and we went through the derivation process, and now I can use this verb, what was once a verb, as multiple parts of speech because of these things. And what we're going to look at today, if you look at numbers 2 and 3 on this screen, is this derivation process, the affixation. Affixation. So what happens when I add a bull to likes to create likable? What happens when I add lead to like to create likely? And that's what we're going to discuss today. To recap, let's bring us to where we are now with morphology. I want to recap what we have played with this semester, okay? Because you've learned a lot of terms and you can now do a lot of amazing things with some words because your mind's blown up and you are on your way to becoming a linguist and an educated future language educator. So let's recap what we've learned this semester so far, and I want to do this with the example word reimagine, okay? So reimagine, that's our example word. One of the first things we did this semester with phonology is we looked at phonemes, okay? So if I gave you the word reimagine and you wrote it phonetically in the International Phonetic Alphabet, you would get what you see on the screen here, and you would pronounce it as reimagine. Okay, I kind of blurred my phonemes there, but they're all right there. So the question is, how many phonemes does this word have? And I hope you can count and figure it out, but you should be able to answer it, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 phonemes in this word. Okay, that means there's 8 unique sounds in the word reimagine. Awesome. Then we went into looking at that transition from sound to how words are made up of individual sound units. Words are also made up of syllables, so we can look at reimagine for its syllables, and we see how many syllables does this word have? Well, there are 4. Great. So we've now broken up the phonemes, the individual sounds of a word. We've now broken up the syllables of a word, where we stress and unstress. And we also looked at orthography with graphemes. So we started looking at, well, how does spelling and how does sound overlap, or in some ways, a lot of us found it doesn't overlap very well. So we can look at reimagine and look at it for its graphemes, for its spelling. And we can see, as you can see on the screen here, that I've aligned what sound with the word goes to what graph or grapheme, right? So with the letter R, that prompts the reader to make the R sound. So the question I would ask you is, how many graphemes does this word have? Go ahead and take a minute to count. And the answer is 8. Even though there are 9 letters in this word, there are 8 graphemes. And that's because the NE at the end is a digraph, which I hope you're able to recognize by now. So at this point in the semester, we've gone over phonology and we've learned about the word phoneme. And phoneme is the definition of a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. There were 8 sounds in the word reimagine. We need to produce 8 tiny units of sound to produce orally the word reimagine. With orthography, we went over graphemes. And graphemes are the smallest unit of writing. We had to use 8 graphemes to spell the word reimagine. Okay. Now we're going to go into morphology, and this is why I'm building up to it. Because in morphology, we deal with morphemes, which is the new word I was going to introduce you to. And the definition of a morpheme is smallest unit of meaning. So there's a consistency here, right? Smallest unit, smallest unit, smallest unit. But the smallest unit of what is changing? And so with morphology, the key word is meaning. What do things mean? In part, that means we get to use the dictionary a lot to help us with this stuff. But it's not necessarily looking up words that you're all familiar with, because when we're talking about meaning, we're not always talking about complete full words. So let's investigate that. So morphology separates a word based on the units of meaning in that word. So I'm going to give you the same word we've been looking at here with our other examples, reimagine. Reimagine. In morphology, we would separate this word based at the breaking point of meaning. So when I look at reimagine, I can find 2 units of meaning. Which means basically to do again, and imagine, which means to form a mental image or concept of something. So there are actually 2 units of meaning in this word. So that poses the question, how many morphemes does this word have? This word has 2 morphemes. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning, or the smallest units of meaning in a word. Okay, so I'm going to illustrate this a lot more. We're going to go into what a morpheme is. That's what this lecture is about. But we have to be mindful from here on out not to say word. We want to say morpheme. So if I say in the word taco, blah, 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 I want to talk about the morpheme taco and not the word taco. And I'm going to illustrate why here just now. So when I look at the morpheme cat, what do you think of? When I say cat, what comes to mind? Well, most likely the little orange guy that's on the screen right now, right? So again, let's look at what the definition of a morpheme is. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a word. Cat is a morpheme. And we cannot break down the morpheme cat into smaller units without the meaning changing. So when I say cat, you think of this orange fluffy character that I have on the screen right now. And that's what I want you to think. I cannot break cat down any smaller and get you to still think about that orange fluffy kitten, right? Okay, but I can illustrate it this way. If I break down the morpheme cat into ca or ca, you cannot possibly still be thinking of that little furry creature. Now you might think, oh, well, that has no meaning. CA means nothing to me. Or I had one student point out that it made them think of California, right? So when I broke down the morpheme cat any further, the meaning that I wanted you to have, which was that furry creature, completely disappeared. That's how I know that cat is the smallest morpheme, is the smallest unit of meaning that I can have to still get you to think about that orange fluffy creature. And I cannot break it down to any smaller units without that meaning, the orange fluffy creature, disappearing from your head. So that's how I know cat is a morpheme. It means something, and it can't get any smaller without that meaning disappearing or becoming a different meaning. So cat is a morpheme. We also have cats. Cats. Cat here in this word is still a morpheme, but the s in cats is also a morpheme because now you're no longer thinking of one fluffy little creature, a cat. You're thinking of multiple fluffy little creatures because of the S. So cat is a morpheme, but so is the s in this word because the plural S makes you think of more of them. So you know that the S has meaning because to you it means more than one. It means plural. It means multiple. So in the word cats, there are two morphemes. Cat, which means fluffy creature, and the plural S, which makes you think of multiple fluffy creatures. And there's a reason why in our exercise I included the word taco and tacos because it illustrates the same point. When I say taco, you think of a very specific item. I cannot break down the morpheme taco any smaller. So if I were to say acco, you're not going to think of what I want you to think of, which is the shelled, delicious item on the screen. Okay, so I know taco is the smallest unit of meaning that I can have to mean this delicious piece of food right here. And same with it, we use taco, but with tacos, now you're thinking of multiple tacos. You're not just thinking of one. So moving forward, keep in mind that morphemes may or may not coincide with what we think of as a word. Do these look like words to you? No, but they have meaning, and a morpheme is any unit of a word that has meaning. So we use the S to indicate plural, and we just saw that with tacos and cats. And we use items just like the other ones on the screen to change or add meaning to these words that we're using. And you have basically, we've used this word in different points in the semester, this lexicon, this mental dictionary. You, each of you, all 90 of you, hopefully watching this lecture this semester, have a mental dictionary where you have all these morphemes, just like the ones on the screen, in your head that you know how to sort through and you know how to use and you know what they mean, which is why you are capable of adding them to words. So how do we make words? Let's come back to this term. This derivations, we've thrown around this word affixation. So what are we doing with morphemes and how does that relate to affixation? Well, let's start by saying that affixation, this is the term we started this lecture with, right? Is an umbrella term for what we called a prefix or suffix. So when we covered this slide earlier in this mini lecture, I showed you these words, prefix or suffix, and let's talk about what those mean. So when we talk about affixation or affixes, that's an umbrella term for prefixes, infixes, and suffixes. And this is that derivational process. New terms, right? Over your head, overwhelmed, possibly, but don't worry about it. Let's break down what these terms mean because again, we're linguists and we look at what words mean, right? So we know, I guarantee you, you know a little bit about what these words mean just by looking at the little morphemes in the word. So the one thing all these words have in common is this morpheme fix, right? Fix, 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 affix, prefix, infix, suffix. Well, what does fix mean? Literally, the first definition when you go to a dictionary, fix means to fasten something securely in a particular place or position. Okay? So fastening. Now, you already know we're working with words. That's what we're talking about. We're linguists. This whole class is about language, right? So as you can imagine, we're fastening words to words, right? Or in this case, morphemes to morphemes. So again, affix is an umbrella term. We already know fix means to fasten. Well, what does aff mean? Aff is it means basically to adjoin, specifically to fasten something to something else. Well, this is a language class and we're talking about morphemes, so we're talking about fastening morphemes to other morphemes, okay? And there's 3 ways we do that. Affix is an umbrella term for 3 types of affixes, basically. The first one is prefixes. Well, what does pre mean? Pre means before. So we're fastening something before a word. Look at the word reimagine. We just used this word in our examples. We're fastening re to the word or the morpheme imagine. That is a prefix. We fastened it before the word or the morpheme imagine. We also have infixes, which means we're fastening something inside or in between the word, and I'm going to show you what that is in a couple minutes. There are not a ton of them in English, but I will show you what that is. But the big ones are prefix, which means we're fastening something before the word, or suffixes, which means we're fastening something after the word. So suff literally means under or below, and it's a variation of sub as in submarine, right? Below water, support to come up, sup to come up under someone to offer support. So suffix means we're going to fasten something after the word. So you've got the word imagine, and we can fasten the suffix ation to it and get the word imagination. Okay, I want to point something out real quick because some of you will notice this. Wait, but imagine is spelt with an E. And right there I have imagine without the E. Yes, but we are dealing with morphemes right now. We're dealing with meaning. And I might have to illustrate it different ways on the screen just to illustrate the point. But we're dealing with meaning right now. We're not dealing with how things are spelt. We're dealing with units of meaning, and there are some crazy spelling systems in English which you and I already know. So I want you to put aside spelling, and I'm going to come back to this point a little later in this mini lecture. So affixation. Remember, it's an umbrella term for prefixes or suffixes or the not so often used infix. And we see this in the word undoable. So do is our main morpheme. It's our main word, right? And we can add a prefix, which means to add something before the word and say undo. And we can add a suffix, which is able, which is something we add after the word. So now we have undoable. So here you have an example of a word where we were able to add a prefix and a suffix, and it changed the word all along the way, right? It changed parts of speech and it changed meaning. But some of you are asking, okay, wait, you're bringing up infixes and you're making it sound really elusive. And it is. It's not elusive. It's just not done often. But there are a couple of examples in English where we do this. Fantastic. We can say fan-frickin-tastic. We can infix. We can add a morpheme in the middle of the word. We've got another where we can say a whole nother. So we're infixing again. We're adding a morpheme in the middle of a word. But again, this is not often. We don't do this a lot in English. Some other languages do it quite more. Okay, so let's recap. We are in the chapter on morphology, which has to do with the study of words and how words are formed. We've talked about affixation now. How one of the main ways we form words in English is we do this derivational process called affixation, where we can add a prefix, suffix, or sometimes an infix to change the meaning of the word, and to change sometimes to change the part of speech, so to change it from a noun to an adjective. But this is a big way that we do this. So in the process of talking about prefixes and suffixes and affixation, we're discussing morphemes, which are all the units of a word that have meaning to it. So when you look at the word undoable, it has 3 morphemes. There are 3 small units of meaning. Un means something, do means something, and able means something. Those are all morphemes because they all have meaning. Each of them carry meaning with it. But we want to differentiate another level of morphemes. Some of you are thinking about this already, and I want to tell you there's a description for what you're thinking. There's a difference between bound morphemes and free morphemes. In short, bound morphemes are morphemes, units of meaning, that have to attach to something. They can never exist as their own word. So if you look at the word tacos, we said tacos had two morphemes in it, taco and the s sound, tacos. And the S, the plural S, the s, means something. It means plural, right? But it can never stand as its own word. It's bound. It has to be bound to another word, to another morpheme to exist, right? I've never seen s used as a word in a book or in speech, okay? It's a bound morpheme. And then we have free morphemes, which are morphemes that can stand alone. Taco is a morpheme. It also can stand by itself. It doesn't need anything else with it unless you want to change the meaning, but it's what we call a free morpheme because it can stand by itself. So there's a difference between bound and free morphemes. Let's go into this a little more. So a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning, and we know that there's free morphemes and bound morphemes. Bound morphemes are always affixes. They're always the thing we're adding to the word. This could be the suffix or the prefix or the infix, but those are the bound morphemes, okay? Then there's free morphemes, which are the root or base of the word. This is the word or the morpheme that we are adding the suffixes and prefixes to. So let's look at some examples here. We have the word like, the morpheme like. And because it can stand by itself, we know this is the free morpheme. And then we can add a bound morpheme to it to create the word unlike. We have the word cycle. And because it can stand by itself, I know it's a free morpheme. And we can add the bound morpheme try. Try cannot stand on its own, but it means three, right? But when you attach it, you can attach it to another word. And it's a bound morpheme. We have the word social, and I know it's a free morpheme, and we can add the bound morpheme anti to it. And anti can't exist as its own word. It's always bound or attached to something. Pizza, right? Pizza is a free morpheme, but I can add the bound morpheme S to indicate plural, but I can't ever use the S as its own word. Walk. The free morpheme walk, I can use it on its own, but I can't use ing on its own. Ing is a bound morpheme. Drive. Drive is a free morpheme. It doesn't need anything attached to it, but I can add the bound morpheme to it, right? Okay, so but I want to point out something here again about spelling. So based on what I've had on the screen. Wait, but drive is already spelt with an E, so you're technically only adding an R. Yes, but we are dealing with morphemes. We're dealing with meaning right now, not English spelling conventions. So I understand that in English spelling, drive ends in an E, but think about even just oral speech, drive, driver. We're adding the bound morpheme at the end, which changes it from a verb to a noun, okay? Like teacher, waiter. So free morphemes can stand alone as a word. Like imagine. Bound morphemes cannot stand alone as words. They must be attached to another word. Here's some examples of some free morphemes. Boy, desire, gentle, Mississippi, lady, water. And we can add plenty of bound morphemes to these. These are morphemes that can't stand alone as words. Ish, able, nis, itty, un, li, ism. Again, remember in your head, you've got this whole dictionary of these in your head. So we have boyishness, undesirability, ungentlemanliness, and I want to illustrate here something very important. You can have lots of bound morphemes on a word. We layer them up. Look at ungentlemanliness. We have 4 bound morphemes on that word. Okay, so when you get to some of your quizzes later and we ask about how many morphemes are in the word, you might need to be aware that we can layer up these morphemes. I want to give you a couple warnings before you go into the next exercise. Free morphemes. Okay, so in the word drive, the free morpheme is drive and the bound morpheme is If I ask you the question, what is the free morpheme in the word driver? The correct answer per the test and per what I'm telling you is drive, D-R-I-V-E. The incorrect answer is driv, D-R-I-V. Okay? So drive is the free morpheme. Drive is the root word. I understand that you're only literally adding an R when you add the bound morpheme to it, but I expect the answer drive, the full spelling of the free morpheme, if you were posed a question like this on the test. And here's why I expect that. Let's look at the word timer. Timer, right? I'm going to set my timer and see how fast you can take the test. The free morpheme in that word is time, right? And the bound morpheme is the part, right? That's the part we're attaching. So if I ask you, what is the free morpheme in the word timer? The answer is time, T-I-M-E. The incorrect answer is Tim, okay? Because Tim does not mean time. Okay, so some words, literally, if you spell them wrong, you do change the meaning. And this is why I'm stressing that you would spell drive, D-R-I-V-E, instead of driv, D-R-I-V. Okay, the root of the word, the free morpheme in the word timer is not Tim. Tim is a person, okay? He is not the root of the word timer. Time is the root word, is the free morpheme in the word timer. Something else I want to point out is what a morpheme is not, okay? Let's look at the word reseed, okay? Re is a bound morpheme, and seed is a free morpheme. But notice how this word ends in ed, right? It ends in ed. Well, isn't that a morpheme then? It's making it past tense? Well, no. No one in here should think seed is a past tense word, right? I know you don't think that. So if you were asked the question, is the ed in seed a suffix? Are we adding the suffix ed to this word to make it past tense? The correct answer is no. It just happens to be spelt with ed. That doesn't mean it's past tense, okay? It just happens to be the way the word is spelt. An incorrect answer would be yes. Ed, that would be incorrect because ed is not a suffix on this word. It's not making it past tense. So earlier in this lecture, I asked you, or I posed the question, how can pre-order be a verb but end in er like the nouns teacher, catcher, and waiter? So let's explore that, because again, we're still discussing what a morpheme isn't, and you have to know the word. Let's start by looking at teacher. In the word teacher, the free morpheme, the base word, is teach, right? And I could add the bound morpheme er to create teacher, so a noun, teacher. So in this example, is the er in teacher a suffix? Is it a morpheme? Is it a suffix we're adding? The correct answer is yes. I'm adding er to the free morpheme teach to create this new word, teacher, to be a noun, right? The person doing the teaching. So if we look at the word reorder, I'm telling you right now, the bound morpheme is re, and the free morpheme is order. So is the er in reorder a suffix? It's not, because a suffix would be added. You would have to then say, okay, if er is a suffix, then what is the free morpheme in this word? Are you saying ord, ord, is the free morpheme? Because the last I checked, ord was not a free morpheme. It's not a word that can stand on its own. Order is a free morpheme. So again, in English, I recognize that this word ends in er, and er can, for some words, be a suffix, but it's not for this word. So be careful with how things are spelt, okay? You can use a dictionary for some of this stuff to figure it out. And you're also speakers of the language, so I know it's up here. Don't overthink it. But the first thing you want to do with all these words is think, what's my free morpheme? What's my smallest unit of meaning? Okay, what are my smallest units of meanings? And in order, I cannot break that word down any smaller without the meaning disappearing, right? So in this case, er is not a suffix. It just is the spelling conventions of this word. All right, this wraps up my mini lecture, which I realized wasn't too many. It's kind of got long, so I'm sorry about that. You're going to move into an exercise now on morphemes. And based on what we just discussed in terms of prefixes and suffixes, and in terms of morphemes and free and bound, okay, those are basically the 5 terms we've looked at. So again, prefixes, suffixes, free and bound morphemes, free morphemes, bound morphemes, and just morphemes in general. You're going to go do this exercise now where you take the words from our taco story and tell me about the morphemes in them. So I'm going to ask you questions like, what's the suffix in this word? So here's your word bank if you want to recap. And then now you can leave this lecture and go on and move to this exercise and answer some practice questions about morphemes in regards to these words. All right, see you guys later.